Okay. And going back to your childhood, did you have any dreams, motorsport dreams, or were you focused on other things as a kid?
As a kid, not really motorsport dreams. Growing up in Southern Arizona, you had to have a dirt bike. If you didn't have a dirt bike, you didn't have any friends. And so that's what most of my motorsport experience was at the time, with dirt bikes. My dad was not a car guy at all. My dad, like, cars or transportation, that's all they're for. And when I started doing hot rod stuff later on, he wasn't too impressed with any of that. But the neighborhood mechanic, and different era back then, right? You could work on everything, you could do stuff. And the neighborhood mechanic lived a couple of doors down from us, and he did have a 1940 Ford that was a hot rod. And he would occasionally, take us kids, if we'd go down and help him out, hand a tool, do whatever, he'd take us for a ride. But that's kind of how I got introduced to it. The main thing for me, though, was dirt bikes, because we all had dirt bikes out here in the desert.
Yeah. Are you still big in bikes, whether it be dirt bikes, motorcycles, etc.?
Well, I got two of them right there.
Those gorgeous.
Yeah, not dirt bikes so much. I went through a few years where I had a rocket bike. I had a Yamaha FJ1100, and in the mid 90s, it would have been 92, 93, somewhere in that neighborhood, when Byron Hines was racing a Yamaha on the NHRA trail. And he and I had a conversation one time. The FJ11, it was notorious for second gear starting to skip. And mine started doing that. And we were talking one time, and I said, well, I'll tell you what. I said, how about if I come over some weekend? I said, tell me what all I got to buy, and we can hot rod my bike up a little bit, fix the transmission. And he said, I don't work on weekends. He said, if you want to send the motorcycle over, I'll take care of it for you. And so I sent him the bike and picked it up. It was 3 months later when we went over to the World Finals. I drove over instead of flying, drove my pickup over, picked up the bike, and brought it back. So that was kind of fun, because I assume you know who Byron Hines is, as in Vance Hines.
Yes.
And so when he got the bike, he put it on the dyno. It had 87 horsepower. When he gave it back to me, it had 135. And it was so much fun pulling up next to a guy on a ZX11 or something that was supposed to be a real hot rod at a stoplight. And the guy'd look at me and go, and we get to the next stoplight. He laughed at you, wouldn't he? Oh, yeah. And we'd get to the next stoplight, and the guy'd be going,
scratching his head. What's in there?
But anyway, that was for a while. And then, I don't know, maybe you get older and calm down a little bit. I'm not really interested in doing wheelies and going 150 miles an hour anymore. So I got a couple of nice little cruisers. Although I do have to say the green one's pretty fast. It's got a fuel injected 124 SMS motor in it. So.
Okay, cool. Well, after your childhood, after getting into that stuff, how did you get started in motorsports to kickstart your career to where you are now?
Well, it really all started going back to the dirt bikes when I was about 13, 14 years old. There was a motocross track out on the edge of town where we used to go occasionally, and they had actual competitions instead of just blasting across the desert. And right next to the motocross track was a drag strip. I had never paid any attention to the drag strip until we were out there at the motocross track one night, and they had funny cars running at the drag strip, and we could hear them. And if you climbed all the way up in the top of the grandstands, that were, I don't know, all of 8 rows high or whatever, you could kind of see them. So me and one of my buddies just kind of went through the desert, jumped the fence, and went over to the drag strip. First time I'd ever seen funny cars, and I was just enthralled. And so started then paying more attention to cars. And this was, again, a couple of years before I got my driver's license, but started spending more time at the drag strip. And when I got my driver's license, I went to the drag strip and started racing, and just started announcing one night on a lark. It was really never something I had set out to do.
Well, that's fun. Did you ever do a lot of racing before you got into broadcasting, or was it kind of just, you raced and then you broadcasted and then you started just announcing these races?
I raced a lot at the local level, just the Saturday night bracket race level. I was actually runner-up in the track championship a couple of years. Never won it, but I was runner-up a couple of times. Won certainly more than my share of races. But one of the things, and it was about this time, and it's one of the things I'm involved with NHRA's Youth and Education Services, and so talk to a lot of vocational school students and high school students and stuff. And one of the things I tell them, and it's a lesson that I learned when I was about 16, 17 years old, I was in high school. I was working part-time at a car wash, and an opportunity came up at a front end alignment brake shop that needed a part-time guy that would fit into my schedule. And I went and applied. And the guy looked at my application. He's like, okay, yeah, high school kid works at a car wash. Yeah, great. I'll call you if I need you. But then he ended up hiring me. And he told me a while later that the reason he hired me, he said, I figured you'd spent the time to come in and fill out an application. At least I could do it, take a look. So he had called my boss at the car wash. And he said, this kid Alan came in and he applied for a job. He said, what can you tell me about him? And the guy said, three things. He shows up on time every day. He works hard, and I'm going to hate to lose him. And the guy said, when he told me that, I knew I was going to hire you. And that was something that always stuck with me. So when I started announcing in Tucson, even though the old Tucson Dragway was the most podunk little racetrack in the middle of nowhere, I mean, literally strip of asphalt in the middle of the desert. The whole tower that I announced out of was, I don't know, 10 feet square, maybe. On a Friday night, we might have 40 or 50 cars, and top speed might be 125 miles an hour. That was just the local Saturday night. But when I started announcing, I was having some fun. I had always been the class clown. I'd always been very outgoing, and certainly wasn't afraid to draw attention to myself. And that seemed to suit me pretty well. I was very comfortable with making fun of my friends and talking about what's going on, and it kind of stuck with me that this might be fun to do. So I just kept practicing, kind of thinking, someday if I get an opportunity, I want to make the most of the opportunity. And so I literally went, every Friday and Saturday night when I was out there thinking, I need to get good enough at this that someday I might have an opportunity. And then when Firebird opened, Wild Horse now, but Firebird opened in 1984, Tucson would close in 1985. But I was up at Firebird one time, not racing, because the only car I had, I couldn't drive at 100 miles. It had big gears in it and big cam in it. It just was not a friendly road car. But I went up there with some friends of mine, and the guy that announced Phoenix, for whatever reason, that day didn't show up. And somebody said, the guy that announced Tucson is here. And they said, send him up. And so I went up, and they had me basically fill in that night. And at the end of the night, the guy that was the track manager at Phoenix said, I need a guy I can rely on. If you're willing to come up here and work, I'll hire you. And wow, that was kind of the start. And then from being there, the NHRA national event came to town once a year, and we still have the policy, if there's a track announcer that wants to come out and audition, wants to try out, wants to work with us a little bit, we'll give them an opportunity to come out. And that was the policy that was in place back then. So the one year I went out and kind of volunteered to fill in, and the next year they called me and said, hey, if you're available, we'd like to hire you just to do the Phoenix race. And I met Steve Evans, who was the dean of motorsports announcers at the time. I mean, Steve Evans did everything. And we got to chit-chatting a little bit, and he told me, doing some top-end interview, doing some driver interview things, he said, you ask really good questions. And I gave him a business card. I said, tell that to everybody you know. And it was about 3 or 4 months later, he called and he said, hey, there's some stuff coming up. There's some opportunities. Would you be interested in doing a videotape audition to potentially go to work for Diamond P Sports, which at the time was a big production company that did a lot of different stuff? And so, of course, I had to mull that over for a while. I said, hell yes. And went and did the audition. And that's kind of how I got started. But I always went to work thinking that, you're auditioning, you're trying out, to this day, I always tried to leave the racetrack a little smarter than when I got there. I tried to learn something every weekend. I just am still continuing to try to improve my craft. Even a lot of people tell me I'm pretty good at it.
Okay, well, thank you. That was a great answer. You mentioned a lot about drag and hot rods. Is that obviously? I mean, that's how you got started. Is that your favorite portion of racing? Is that where you spend most of your time broadcasting, or are there other bits and pieces of the industry that you enjoy equally as much and maybe would enjoy broadcasting for?
Well, broadcasting, drag racing is certainly my bread and butter. I'm looking at my calendar. 41 weekends probably that I'm going to be someplace at a drag race this year. Okay. I have done some motocross stuff. I've done sand drags. I'm still involved on the television side with boat racing. I don't know if you ever catch drag boats on CBS Sports or on MAV TV. Pretty good chance.
I've seen a couple of races and they're pretty interesting to watch. That's stuff that not many people know about, but it's super
Yeah,
cool
and
to watch.
with the drag boats, there's probably 75% chance that my voice is on the show. I don't actually go to the races, but I do travel to the studio afterwards because all those shows are post-produced. I have a big follower of NASCAR. I know a lot of people that make a living over there. I've got a lot of friends that live on that side of the world, and I pay a lot of attention to that. Drag racing has pretty much sucks up all of my time. So,
Yeah.
there've been, like, I had a meeting with a guy in Vegas last week that's doing some stuff, and he says, hey, I'd really like to have you come do. He says, I've got 6 events. I said, okay, let's look at it. Well, 5 events I've got a conflict with, and contractually, I have to do all the NHRA national events. So that pretty much locks me out from doing anything else. There's other things that I enjoy. There's other things that I follow, but I simply don't have time. If an opportunity came up to, on an off weekend, go do an IndyCar race or a NASCAR race, or I'd love to do that. And I believe I'm well versed enough that I wouldn't look like a complete idiot. I certainly wouldn't be as polished as the people that do it, but I think I think I know enough about it that I told there was a 2-day NASCAR test with the new generation car in February, and I used it was not open to the public, but I pulled a couple strings with my connections and got invited to come up and take part in that. And Dave Moody, who is Sirius XM Speedway and also one of the MRN announcers for NASCAR, has been for a long time, really good friend of mine. And I was talking to him after the fact, and I told him, I said, I knew enough about the old car that I felt like I could carry on a discussion. I didn't know enough about the new car to start an argument. So I went up there and spent a couple of days just because I'm very mechanical. I'm a heavy equipment mechanic by trade before I get into all this other stuff. And I really enjoy the nuts and bolts, and I enjoy knowing how things work. One of the things that I think I do pretty well is when something happens to one of the cars on the racetrack, I know what happened. Not just, oh, look, it blew up, but I can explain to the fans, and we can see it on the replay screen. This is what happened. This is the situation. This is what caused it. This is, and I kind of pride myself on knowing the mechanics of that stuff.
I think that's super important, especially when you're trying to connect your broadcast to fans that might not know as much as you do, obviously. That kind of rolls into my next question about what do you think are like the key elements of being an effective broadcaster and announcer. You mentioned just now like being well versed in obviously everything that you're announcing, but other than that, what do you think is like the most important thing about being an announcer that you have held with you and carried with you throughout your career?
I think being objective, because whatever the sport is, you're going to develop personal relationships, and there's going to be people that you like, that you get along with it, and like anything else, there's going to be people that aren't your favorite. But you really have to, as a broadcaster, report without letting your personal feelings get in. I think that's very important. Knowing what you're doing, knowing certainly helps. I've been doing it for so long, and I really have a horrendous memory. I can't remember what I had for lunch yesterday, but there are certain things that just stick with me. And so, remembering that, hey, this happened 3 years ago, or this happened another time, I think helps me out a lot. And because I was there, and because I saw it, and because for whatever reason I retained some of that stuff. But I really think the most important thing is to be objective. I've heard other announcers, and even some of the drag race announcers, that almost sound like they're rooting for somebody. And sometimes they flat out do sound like they are. And I just think that, you have to be objective. And I also try to focus very heavily on the positive. Steve Evans told me a number of years ago, and another just thing that stick with me. He said, even when you're doing the most podunk little race in the middle of nowhere that only has 6 people in the grandstands, you got to remember that the people that are in the cars are somebody's hero. Their kid is watching, or their cousin is watching, or there's somebody. And even if there's a kid who's got his mom's minivan who's out there running, 16 seconds, 75 miles an hour, he's got a buddy on the fence that wishes he had his mom's minivan that he could be out there doing this too. And so I always try to find something positive to say, with the pro competitors, it's pretty easy because I spend so much time with them. But I am a huge car guy. The fact that I still own my high school car, I think says something about that. And I just love the cars. And So if I'm announcing, and there's a 428 Cobra Jet Mustang, or there's a Hemi Roadrunner, or there's a Copo Camaro, or there's something, I get excited about the cars. But I also really love the guys that we've got a guy on the West Coast that races a '78 Gremlin in stock eliminator. There's a class for it, and I just think that anybody who would buy hot rod parts for a Gremlin, that's kind of cool. And so I try to make I try to make everybody feel like, at least at that moment when they're on the racetrack, that they're the star of the show. And again, being objective is not sounding like a cheerleader, even though you certainly have better relationships with some people than others.
Yeah, thank you. So whether it be about the change in like cars and the technology in cars, or the technology in broadcasting, just tell me what have been like the most important technological changes throughout your career, like looking back to the 80s where you were doing announcing like in Arizona, to now where you mentioned like the new gen cars, not being like the fact that you weren't even able to come up with like an argument for the new gen cars, like so much stuff that you would have never thought possible for motorsports. What are like the biggest technological changes that you've been surprised about?
Well, I don't know that surprised would be the right answer.
I guess you're right.
Technology is forever moving forward, and it's interesting to me that living through it, you don't really notice the changes. If you see somebody every day, um, you're not going to. It's not going to be like you haven't seen somebody in 10 years, and it's like, wow, look at you. Whether they've gained 20 pounds or lost 20 pounds, or that if you're there every day, it amazes me now when I go to a museum and I look at something and it's like, wow, that was 25 years ago. And I remember that when it was a new thing, and wow, I can't believe how far we've come. But
Yeah.
And on the racing side of it, technology is just constantly going forward. So I don't know that I could put my finger on necessarily one thing. On the broadcasting side of it, the same thing. The technology has gotten to the point. The one thing, and I don't know that it's a plus so much, is everything we do now is being broadcast somewhere. And back in the day, if you had a slip of the tongue or did something, there might be a few people that heard it, and you could forever deny that. No, that's not what I said. You must have heard me wrong. But
now it's everywhere,
and everything is instantly out there, and so you've got to be a little bit more careful with what you do, because everything's being recorded and everything can come back at you.
Yeah, understood. Well, on that note, is there anything that you would have done differently throughout your career? Whether it would have been like another step this way towards another industry, or, I mean, your career, you tell me.
2020 hindsight is always perfect, and there are a couple of times when I might have made a different decision. I don't really know. I don't have anything that I hugely regret. But there were a couple of times when I wish maybe I would have said no to this instead of taking the project. I'm a big believer that you don't say no until you've heard the offer, even if you're not interested. But there have been a couple of times when I've done things that I didn't really want to do. I wasn't real enthusiastic about, and looking back at some of the old tapes and some of the old stuff, I think, and you're always your harshest critic. Okay, if you get into broadcasting, the day when you think that was my worst day ever, oh my God, somebody should take me out and shoot me, 500 people are going to go, see, that was the greatest job you ever did. But you're always very hard on yourself. And some of those things I look back on now, and I feel like I wasn't necessarily given 100% because I really wasn't that enthusiastic about the project. And having that knowledge today, there are times when somebody will come and ask me to do something, and I'll just tell them no. And it's just, especially if I know that, you can hire Fred, and he will do a great job for you. If there's somebody better for the job than I am. That's overall though, I really can't. I've been very fortunate. because of this job, I've set foot in all 50 states. I've spent time in the Mideast, and I've spent a little bit of time in Europe and going to races and doing stuff. And I'm very grateful for that. I still don't see it. I look at myself as like, I watch cars and talk about cars. Who couldn't do that? But then there are times when I hear somebody else up there and I'm like, oh my God, somebody get the cane and get that guy out of here.
Get him out of here.
Yeah. But I feel like I'm pretty fortunate. I think there have been a couple of times when I was in the right place at the right time, but I also feel like I was prepared for the opportunity when it came up, was able to take advantage of it.
Yeah. Okay. What are like the most memorable experiences from your career? If there are any that stand out, or any like funny moments that you can remember?
Well,
I know you must have plenty of stories, but if there are any that stand out.
One of my all-time favorite, and this goes way back. I wasn't even working with NHRA at the time. I was working for Firebird up in Phoenix. John Force at the time did a lot of match racing, and so he would come to Firebird on a pretty regular basis to have, a funny car spectacular or a jet car show and whatever. And we were up there one night, and now I'm the local track announcer. He's John Force, and he has to deal with 100 stupid local track announcers around the country, and I'm just one of them. And it was a kind of a windy, blustery evening. The dust was blowing across the racetrack, and it wasn't like a really nice night to be at the track anyway. Somebody had crashed, and we were cleaning up the track and doing whatever, and the drivers were all standing down on the starting line. So I took the wireless microphone down, and I figured I'm going to go down and talk to these guys, because other than that, I'm just whatever, playing music. So I took the wireless microphone down, and I went over and like, hey, we're John Force. And I was needling him a little bit because he's always been a little bit of a loose cannon when he gets into interviews. He'll fire off something, and I was trying to get him to go that direction. And he said, "Yeah, this is just going to be a good old fashioned tire smoking, blower popping match race, because this is going to be the most fun you guys have ever had." And I said, "Well, John, I know nobody's popped more blowers off a funny car than you have." And I stuck the microphone in his face, and he said, "You're kind of an asshole, you know that?" And the other guy that was up in the tower just like shut the mic off. He said, "Oh, well, there was problems down there." And I thought it was hilarious. And the crowd roared. Now, fast forward about 3 weeks. I worked for a subcontractor down here in Southern Arizona at the time. And I get a call from Joe Thaden at Firebird. This is before everybody had cell phones. So that, I go back to the dinosaur era. And I get a call from Joe, who's the track manager at Firebird. And he said, "Do you know anybody that could go rescue John Force's rig?" He said, "They're sitting at the scales in San Simon, which is a little border town, Arizona, New Mexico. And they're overweight, and they're not going to let them move until they figure out how to get some weight out of that truck." And I said, "Sure." I said, "I'll go get them. I've got a 3/4 ton pickup, and I said, we can go load a bunch of junk in the back of this thing." And I said, "But you make sure John knows the guy he said was an asshole 3 weeks ago is the guy that's going to bail him out of this deal." And he said, "Let me call you right back, because everybody's calling everybody." He said, "I just want to make sure somebody's not." He said, "We'll call you right back." 2 minutes later, John Force called. And the first thing he says, "Alan, man, I was just kidding. I was just joking." I said, "John, we're fine. Really, everything's good." So he explains the situation. He says, "I just need to go down there, take about 5,000 pounds out of the truck, get the thing across the scales, and we'll load the thing up and bring it on." They were coming home to build a new car. And they'd just been paying the fines every time they cross the scale, until they get to this guy in Arizona that says, "No, park it until you can figure out how to make it lighter." So I jump my pickup, go out there, we load a bunch of stuff. I'm sorry, with me, everything's a long story. So I hope that
No, give me as much detail as you can.
So I run out there, and we loaded 4 short blocks and 6 blowers and boxes of clutch parts and all the luggage, and just loaded my truck. And 2 guys out of the semi get in my truck, and he rolls the thing across the scales. It's 80,060 pounds. 80,000 is leaving. And the guy says, "Close enough. Get the hell out of here." And he walks back to me, and I'm sitting in my pickup that's loaded like this. Right? And he says, "You're following him to LA." I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "I don't want you driving 20 miles down the road and loading back." "Oh, no, sir. We'd never dream of that." "No, sir. We're headed for LA." Get out. So Chico was the guy who was driving his truck at the time. And he says, "We'll just stop at Triple T," which is a big truck stop in Tucson. It's about 80 miles from the scale. said, okay. So I follow him there. Now, between the scale and Triple T, 3 different DOT cars pulled up and they passed me and drip in between me and the semi and then passed and take the next exit and disappear. And then we drive 15 miles and it wasn't even the same guy 3 times. It was 3 different guys. So we get to Triple T and Chico says, you see that? And I said, oh yeah. Said, what do you think? And I said, I think the first time they see you, and it's not like John Force's truck is incognito, right? I said, I think the first time they see you and I'm not following you, they're going to call and they're going to get the portable scales out there and you guys are going to be in a whole pile of trouble. And he says, I got to call Force. So we go and get on a payphone, get John on the phone. I got him on the phone. I said, John, look, here's the deal. I said, I will take my truck. I can park it inside my shop. It's a locked, alarmed building in a fenced yard with dogs. With nobody's going to mess with it. This is like Tuesday afternoon. I said, Friday when I get off work, I'll drive over there. I'll be waiting for you Saturday morning. You can have all your junk back. And he said, no. He goes, the problem is we're building a new car. And he said, sure as hell, you'll have something we need, and we just can't lose time. He says, look, he said, I'll rent your truck from you. Just let my guys bring the thing over. And he says, you can fly over and hang out with us for the weekend and drive your truck home. And I said, well, if you want the truck, fine, you can have it. I don't care. I can drive my company truck. You don't have to go through all. Just figure out how I'm going to get it back. So we come up with this plan. They're going to take my truck. I'm going to fly over Sunday morning because I was actually doing a dirt track race on Saturday night here in Tucson. That's another interesting story. And so I'll fly over Sunday morning, pick up my truck. So Sunday morning, I get on the plane, I fly over. Chico picks me up at the airport. We drive out to John's shop, and there's my pickup sitting in the parking lot with all the windows broken out of it, the stereo torn out of the dash, destroyed.
What?
And so we pull up, and Chico's like, oh my God. He said, I got to call Force. And so he gets on the phone to John, and we went in and found a shop vac and started cleaning up the glass and stuff. There was a card from the Yorba Linda Police Department stuck in the window. They had found it like 2 o'clock in the morning or something and stuck a card in and said, call us so we can finish up the report. But my truck was sitting there and somebody smashed all the windows out of it, stole the stereo out of it, and took the CB. And so John shows up and he's physically sick about this whole thing. I mean, physically, like he's going to throw up. And he said, man, you did us a favor. And he said, I just can't. He said, here's the new plan. I'm going to put your truck in the shop. We're going to fix everything. Da-da-da. He said, I'll fly you home. He said, as soon as the truck's done, you can fly back over, or I'll have somebody drive it out to you. And he said, I'll rent you a pickup in the meantime. I said, John, stop. I said, you've done enough. I'm going to take my truck and get the hell out of here. I'm not leaving it anymore. I said, I got insurance. It's not, and it was just, and it's one of those, you could either laugh or cry. And it just was funny instant. And that incident endeared me to John to the point for now 35 years or whatever it's been. I have unlimited access. I have, I don't know, that put me in the club. And, insurance covered everything for my truck. And it really, at the end of the day, the story was worth the headache. And just fun fact, one of the things that they did was they busted the radio antenna off of it. And so we kind of jerry-rigged a little radio in the truck and made this radio antenna out of 304 stainless tubing that was going to be a fuel line on the funny car. And that was on the truck until the day I sold it, when I decided I was going to keep it because that was still my John Force tore up my truck souvenir.
Wow. That's crazy that you even kept a little memento from it.
I figured whoever bought the truck would probably want a real antenna, so I just got a real antenna for it.
Very true. What a story. Wow. That's something, listen, even though your truck got broken into, I think that's something that I would want to be a part of. Like if I was in your shoes, I would have laughed as well. And that's a crazy story for you just to whip out.
And the fact that he had called me an asshole on an open microphone 3 weeks before just made it.
Exactly.
But I've been around for so long. I have some kind of personal story about most of the people. John is actually the only driver that was driving when I started that still is. Everybody else out there, and I mean, even like Craig Anderson has been driving now for 25 years. Wherever everybody out there has had to get used to me being the announcer. And so that I've got quite a bit of leeway that somebody coming in new wouldn't have. And there's no way to earn seniority other than to hang around for a long time. So I've been fortunate to do that, but uh, I've just, over the years, things come up, whether, you're, they had me be part of the Connie Coletta roast, and his celebrating his 50 years in racing. That was a really fun evening. I've hitchhiked on Alan Johnson's private jet one time when we got rained out, and I had nothing to do for a week. And he said, "You want to go to Santa Maria and hang out in the machine shop with us?" So I jumped on a plane, went home with him, and I just I've been very fortunate. Getting to know the guys a lot away from the track. And I'm also, one of the things, I'm single and don't have kids, so I'm really flexible with my travel stuff. If I'm going, for years, my birthday fell on the weekend of the Englishtown race. Tony Bartone, who was an alcohol funny car racer, still is a racer. He is as Italian as you can imagine, and he's the president of a construction company in New York City. Now, you can draw any inference from that you want to.
Yeah.
But my birthday always fell on that weekend. So he tells me one time, he goes, "Why don't you come out and spend a couple of days for your, I'll take you out for your birthday. We'll have a big time." I said, "Sold." And some of that story I still can't tell, but just a lot of things like that over the years where I've gotten an opportunity to spend time and get to know some of these guys away from the racetrack. And it's not always like happy, cheery stuff. When Blaine Johnson got killed in 1996 at Indy, got killed on the racetrack, his father was the truck driver. And so I drove the semi home for him because he obviously had more important things to worry about. So when the weekend was over, I jumped in the semi and drove it from Indianapolis to Santa Maria, California, just so they wouldn't have to worry about it. And that's, part of the family stuff. There's a lot of the memories are really funny and really, but then there's also some that are, the other side of it. And one thing about being in motorsports, and if you're wanting to get in motorsports and you're going to do it for a long time, you're going to have to deal with the fact that there at some point is going to be a tragedy. And, like I've said, I do a internet-based radio broadcast with Joe Costello, WFO Radio, every week. And we're not playing with yarn balls out here. And so something's going to happen. Something is going to go bad. And that's going to be a part of it. Fortunately, the sport continues to get safer and has gotten so much safer over the years. But we still ain't playing with yarn balls. If you're going to be messing around with race cars, at some point somebody's going to get hurt, and that's something that you just have to be prepared for.
Yeah. I live really close to the Daytona International Speedway, so we get a lot of NASCAR news information. It's a big cultural thing there. So I know, like, when something happens in the motorsport world, whether it be a tragedy or a celebration, I'm definitely aware of it. And I have recognized recently, like, how important it is to people. I mean, I'm not saying it's not important, but I understand, like, the impact that has on the culture and the industry. So I really understand where you're coming from, not like on a personal level, but as just a general citizen of Daytona. I understand.
Well, we had a young lady that was working with us for a while, that had gone to school for broadcasting, and really motorsports was her thing. And so she came out, she was working with us and doing some stuff, and really seemed, her on-camera presence was great. She certainly understood, and really looked like, she could have a long future, we're at Bristol. There was a pro mod, had parachute failure, and parachutes tore the brake lines off of it, and this thing went into the net at a very high rate of speed. And she was so freaked out, she basically had to run and hide because she was just like, "Oh my God, he's dead, he's dead, he's dead." And if you're going to be covering the event, you can't do that. You have to shove that aside, put it, and just, it turned out the guy wasn't hurt. He was, busted, beat up a little bit, but he literally got out of the car and walked away when it was all said and done. But she was so freaked out by that, and she's like, "I don't think I could go through that again." And it's like, well, then racing's probably not for you, honey, because things happen, and they happen in a hurry. So
yeah,
and that's just, it's kind of a dark side of, but it's an aspect that you're going to have to deal with if you're going to be around it.
Yeah. So my last big question for you, kind of wrapping this all up. I know you mentioned that previous story just then, along with being unbiased in broadcasting. I wanted to know what advice you would give young people specifically interested in like motorsport broadcasting. I know you kind of just gave me a really personal example, but was there any general advice that you would give to anybody hoping to get into the motorsport broadcasting business?
Know your sport. That's huge. And add something. We have, in this day and age, between computers and live timing and just all the information, and we have people that come out to drag races specifically and want to break in, want to do this. And what they'll do is say, okay, well, here comes John Smith in a 1969 Camaro with a 350 Chevy, a G-stock automatic. He's a 42-year-old plumber from, and then they'll tell you who won the race and who lost the race, and then they'll go on to the next one. But if all you're going to do is read the information that's available, then I just need somebody that can read.
Mm-hmm.
You have to try to add something to broadcast. I have kind of a dry sense of humor that I use a lot. And I'm also not afraid to make fun of somebody, or being out here for so long. You know, there's a lot of times that something will happen and somebody go, that's just Reinhart. And I get away with it because I've been doing it for a long time. Mm-hmm. But add something, and be yourself is a big thing. You know, when Bob Fry retired, who was the guy that had my position before me, and there were plenty of people came up and go, "You'll never be Bob Fry." Good. I don't want to be Bob Fry. I'm not trying to be Bob Fry. We already had a Bob Fry, and he's still around. I mean, it's not like but what I brought to the table was different from what Bob brought. Bob was very stats, very historic, he would remember a story from 1962 that would fill in that would be relevant to what we're seeing today, and that was all very interesting stuff. That ain't me. Bob couldn't change a freaking tire, and so he wasn't mechanical at all, and I am very mechanical. So I do the job considerably differently than he does. I'm not saying better or worse, but just different. And so, be yourself. Try to do something. Try to do something that makes you stand out from the crowd. Because when I've gotten to the point now that pretty much everybody knows who I am, at least in my industry. But when I was starting, trying to come up with something so that when you go to a new track or you go to a different venue or you go to, instead of just like, oh, that's some new guy, be, oh, that's the guy that ... because they remember something you did, or they heard of something you did, or something, and try to do something that is uniquely you, that makes you stand apart from the crowd a little bit.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate all the information you've given me today, all the stories. It was great to hear what you had to say.
I could tell stories for 50 years.
Yeah, I'm sure. Do you have any questions for me?
What are you trying to get into right now? What are you looking at? Anything in specific, or are you just trying to get into business?
Really, I'm just trying to get into the business. I'm in college right now. I'm done with my third year very soon, and I'm not really sure what I want to do with my career. I'm a big fan of sports, motorsports, hailing from Daytona area. It's been part of my life for a long time. And I'm getting a degree in business right now. So I'm not sure. I mean, I know I can do a lot with that. And I'm just kind of trying to diversify my opportunities and experiences in college to see what I'm interested in. So,
well, I would tell you, if you want to get into broadcasting, never pass up an opportunity to pick up a microphone.
Okay.
Whatever. If it's a junior soccer game and there's a chance to do something, just anything that makes you more comfortable will help. And if you can find, I know there's plenty of like local short tracks down around there. There's New Smyrna.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And if you go to one of those or go out and say, hey, look, if you need somebody to come fill in, one of the things that I did a lot when I was getting started was I would go out and volunteer once.
Yeah.
Say, look, if you want, I'll come out Friday night, I'll work for free. And if you think that somebody you could use, then great. And if you think that I suck, then it won't cost you anything. You can throw me out anytime. And just, I mean, one more quick, just everything with me is a story.
No,
Our local dirt track here in Arizona, and this goes back 30 years ago, Tucson Raceway Park, 3/8 mile dirt oval that NASCAR, International Speedway Corp, held the lease on. It was the only Saturday night short track that NASCAR was involved with on a personal level. When Brian France was learning the business, his dad wanted him to learn the business from the ground up. And he was the track manager at Tucson Raceway Park. The guy that was their announcer out there was not great, and he had a reputation for drinking throughout the evening. So as the night got later and later, he would get worse and worse. And I didn't even know who Brian France was. And I was a cocky little punk kid that was a drag race announcer. And so I, literally just walked in the office and said, hey, who's in charge? Him. And I said, you should hire me as an announcer because the guy you got doing this is not doing a very good job. He said, well, and I said, tell you what. I said, I'll come back next Saturday. I'll work for free. If you hate me, you can tell me to go home. If you like me, we can work out a deal. And he said, see you Saturday. So the next week, when I came back before heat races were over with, he came up and he said, don't leave without seeing me. He paid me $125 cash for the night. And this is, again, 35 years ago. And said, I'll see you next week. And I said, well, just so you know, I said, I do some drag racing. I said, I can't be here every week, but when I can be, I will. And so for 3 years, at least on a part-time basis, I was Brian France's Saturday night short track announcer. And then, of course, he went on to be president of NASCAR and then get into all the trouble he got into. But I did that more than once with places where I said, look, I'll come out one time for free. Give me an opportunity to show you what I can do. And anytime you've got a microphone in your hand, treat it like it's an audition because somebody is watching, somebody is listening, and that can certainly can play in your favor if you're prepared and if you're ready.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. I'll definitely keep that in mind in any aspect. I really appreciate the advice. Anything else for me? Because I'm good with you, unless you want to tell me another story. Unless you've got anything else on your mind.
Like I said, I could tell stories for days, but the thing in this day and age is so different from back when I got started is, with social media, it's so easy for somebody to check somebody out. And that's not something that used to happen. So I would tell you, be careful with that. And, just positive. I've never forgotten that the guy hired me at the auto shop because my boss at the car wash said, I'm going to hate to lose him. Mm-hmm. And so I've always tried to go in thinking that, I wanted to be the guy that they would hate to lose, that I was auditioning for whatever's next. And that's what really helped me out in the announcing stuff when I started doing it, knowing that somebody would be listening. And if an opportunity came up, I wanted to be ready for it. So I was always trying to get better, trying to learn, trying to perfect the craft so that I'd be ready when the opportunities came up. But, the other side of it is, and like I said, I talk to a lot of younger people about this whole social media thing. There people today will come up to me and remember something that I 10 years ago, and maybe that's good, or maybe you're the jerk that blew me off when I was trying to do it. Dude, I'm sorry, but people remember that stuff. And with social media, it's just so easy for all the stuff to get out there. So just try to stay as much as you can on the positive side. I know if somebody comes to me and says, "Hey, I want to go to work for you," and I look up their Facebook page, and their last 5 bosses were all complete idiots, and they hate everything, and they complained about every hamburger they ever got. And that's not somebody I want on my team. I don't need all that negative influence. But one of the other things I tell you, when you're doing announcing, smile, because you can hear that. Believe it or not, if you're smiling and you're having a good time, people will be able to hear that. It'll come across, even if they can't see you, they'll be able to hear the enthusiasm, and every little bit helps.
Gotcha. I'll keep it in mind. Well, thank you for meeting with me today. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure.
I appreciate everything you're doing for me, for the Motorsport Hall of Fame, and I'm sure everything that you said will be influential to everyone that gets to hear it.
Well, I'm happy to help. If there's ever anything else I can do, or you want to get in touch with me, I'm Alan at AlanReinhart.com. That's pretty simple. and
Yes, sir.
feel free to fire away. I don't know if you're at all a fan of drag racing, but you know, if you ever get to Gainesville when the Gator Nationals are in town, look me up.
I will. I will definitely, and I appreciate it.
Right on. Well, it's been a pleasure, and like I said, if you have any more questions or ever need anything, don't be shy. Just reach out.
Yes, sir. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.